Hey everybody, I'm Adam, and this is Think Club. On October 30th, 2018, British GQ released a discussion between Canadian psychologist and best-selling author Jordan Peterson and outspoken feminist Helen Lewis. In this video, I'd like to discuss a particularly contentious exchange from that interview, where Lewis confronts Peterson, attacking Peterson's now famous Lobster hierarchy argument featured in his best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life.
My big problem with the lobsters is that it's scientifically bollocks, right? It's just, you cannot read across from lobsters and what they do to what humans do.
Of course you can. That's why serotonin works on lobsters.
But it works in two different ways. So serotonin makes lobsters more aggressive, it makes humans less aggressive, right? That's what happens.
No, that's not right. Serotonin makes human beings more dominant but less aggressive. And the only reason it makes them more dominant is because they're less irritable and they're less defensively aggressive. So it's not bollocks. I know my neurochemistry. So if you're going to play neurochemistry, let's go and do it.
One of the reasons I follow Peterson's work is because he is offering so many new and interesting ways to conceptualize very old problems. And it's genuinely fascinating to see partisan ideologues, generally feminists and social justice advocates, interface with Peterson's ideas with such ideological zeal, pretentiously emboldened, self-righteously anointed, and yet completely unfamiliar with the very basics of the scientific scholarship they've elected themselves to critique.
Let me just get this straight. You're saying that we should organize our societies along the lines of the lobsters?
I'm saying that it's inevitable that there will be continuity in the way that animals and human beings organize their structures. It's absolutely inevitable. And there is 1/3 of a billion years of evolutionary history behind that.
So what is Peterson's lobster argument? Very simply put, Peterson makes an argument that social hierarchies are a persistent feature of the environment, dating back as far as lobsters. Now, with this in mind, we can infer that our evolutionary development, dating all the way back to these primitive crustaceans, is shaped by this persistent environmental pressure. Now, Peterson makes this argument to counter the commonly held conception that human social hierarchies are purely a social construct, with no biological component shaping their structure or emergence.
The Marxists like to lay inequality at the feet of the West. The capitalism, for example, that's naive beyond belief.
But if you're defending capitalism, once again, you're not defending markets. They've existed before capitalism, and they will exist after capitalism. You are defending a form of social organization based on hierarchy and exploitation.
In many areas of life, there exist social hierarchies in which people are ranked one above another in terms of status and authority. Because these hierarchies limit the scope of human freedom, they should be challenged to prove that they are legitimate, and if they fail to prove their legitimacy, they should be dismantled from below and replaced with horizontal organization.
Now, this presents an interesting dilemma for equity and equality advocates, since while our social, cultural, and political institutions may appear to be quite malleable, our biology is much less so, calling into question the feasibility of many of the utopian, classless society dreams propagated by Karl Marx and other historical and contemporary socialist advocates. It would be hard to argue that lobster hierarchies are a cultural construction, and that is exactly the point. Culture, defined as learned behavior, minimally exists in several species, but humans are the world champions of culture. Most everything we do, from reading to speaking to art to architecture, are all products of culture. So are human hierarchies a product of culture or a product of biology? Well, the answer is obviously somewhere in between. But instead of putting her critical eye toward dismantling Peterson's actual argument, Lewis elects to recast Peterson's argument through her own narrow, gender-fixated lens.
Okay, so what can we learn from killer whales that live in matriarchal pods, often led by a grandmother, someone who's been through a menopause? Why isn't that an example that you've picked to talk about in the book? It's because lobsters say the thing that ideologically you want to talk about, which is your belief that there is a kind of Marxist ideology sweeping.
How did lobsters say that? The point that I was making with lobsters, I just said what it was. that hierarchies have been around for a very long time.
But who genuinely, really, today is arguing, apart from maybe 3 mad Marxist academics, that there is no such thing as hierarchy? Hierarchies
They're not arguing
exist.
that there's no such thing as hierarchy.
Or there
They're
should be no
arguing
such
that-
thing as hierarchies.
Oh, there are plenty of them are arguing that.
Really? Because I see that almost never in the wild as an argument. I see people think that hierarchy should be based on merit and they should be more
What do you
equal.
think the demand for equality of outcome is if it's not an attempt to flatten hierarchies?
I think
No
it's fascinating is
reasonable
that-
biologists dispute the fact that most organisms organize themselves into hierarchies, and that the fundamental biological mechanism for the regulation of hierarchy is the serotonin system. That's not disputable. Now, you can find animal organizational structures that vary from that, what would you call it, fundamental pattern. But the existence of variance isn't proof against the existence of a fundamental pattern. Like, I don't know how you can sit there and be skeptical about this. If you know the literature on hierarchical structure, you understand that across the entire animal kingdom, animals tend to organize themselves into hierarchies.
But
And that,
very-
the neurochemistry
But
of
very
the hierarchy
different
is
types of
serotonergic.
hierarchies, right? So
Well, there's a
you have
pattern.
in
That's why we
chimps-
know they're hierarchies.
Right. Yeah, but like you say, the pattern as if that
The hierarchy is the pattern.
right. Okay, and that's fine. So chimps have one very obvious social structure, and bonobos have
It's
another
not
one.
as different as people have made it out to be.
No.
The bonobos are a lot more violent than the
Right,
than
and they're
the,
not hippie monkeys,
Rousseauian
right?
observers of the bonobos have admitted.
Instead of attacking the prevalence of these hierarchies in nature or providing evidence that their near universal existence has had little effect on animal biology, Lewis points to animals with female-dominated hierarchies as if which sex is dominant in a species somehow invalidates that the dominance hierarchies exist. Why is sex remotely relevant here? What is Lewis arguing? Are feminists making the claim that female-dominated hierarchies are innately devoid of tyranny? Are they making the claim that female-dominated hierarchies are less hierarchical?
And like all male spotted hyenas, his life sucks. Once males turn 2 or so, they leave their clan and strike out on a lonely, dangerous search for a clan with better mating prospects. They endure aggressive hazing by the new clan before even being allowed to join. And once a male does gain acceptance, he becomes the very lowest ranking hyena in the pecking, or bone-cracking order. There's no way to move up the social hierarchy besides simply waiting, either for new males to join the clan below him, or for males ahead of him to die. No adult male will ever top a single female, resulting in a female-dominated hierarchy. Male hyenas like Scarface end up plagued with injuries from harassment and hazing, endure prematurely worn-down teeth from eating too many bones, and on average only live half as long as females do.
Let me be clear here. Peterson's argument has nothing to do with sex or gender. Peterson's argument is that social hierarchies are the byproduct of a competition for resources. These social hierarchies share similar features and are a persistent pattern across the animal kingdom. As all species are shaped by their environment through Darwinian evolution spanning millions of years, it would be quite radical to conclude that these social hierarchies have exerted absolutely no evolutionary pressure on the creatures inhabiting them.
It is exponentially more worthwhile to be successful if you are a lobster and male. Why is all this relevant? For an amazing number of reasons apart from those that are comically obvious. First, we know that lobsters have been around in one form or another for more than 350 million years. This is a very long time. 65 million years ago, there were still dinosaurs. That is the unimaginably distant past to us. To the lobsters, however, dinosaurs were the nouveau riche who appeared and disappeared in the flow of near-eternal time. This means that dominance hierarchies have been an essentially permanent feature of the environment to which all complex life has adapted. A third of a billion years ago, brains and nervous systems were comparatively simple. Nonetheless, they already had the structure and neurochemistry necessary to process information about status and society. The importance of this fact can hardly be overstated.
Now, Lewis fixates on Peterson's reference link between the serotonin system in lobsters and the serotonin system in human beings, as if this link is the crux of Peterson's argument, when in reality, the neurochemical features animating the relevant behaviors are a minor ancillary point at best. Peterson's argument rests on the parallel behaviors and not the neurochemical substances driving those behaviors. Even if Lewis provided overwhelming evidence that Peterson has the neurochemistry wrong, and spoiler alert, she doesn't, it would not change the validity of Peterson's argument one bit. But that's what's so fascinating about these exchanges. So many of Peterson's detractors see Peterson as something he's not. So instead of confronting the arguments he's actually articulating, they're left arguing against misrepresentations and their own logically incoherent drivel.
Let's get on to the lobsters, because I think that the thing that people take away from that is male lobsters compete for female lobsters, and that says something about society now, that men need to be dominant in society, because if lobsters do it, then there is something that we can read about humans from that too.
There's nothing in that chapter at all that suggests that the way that men should succeed in human hierarchies is a consequence of the exercise of power. There's not one line in that entire book that claims that, because it's not what I believe. Most human hierarchies, as I already pointed out, are hierarchies of competence, not power.
Prestige cues. What do you mean when you talk about those?
Underneath prestige and prestige cues is the idea that humans have two forms of status. We have one form of status called dominance, and this is that we get from non-human primates, from chimpanzees, from baboons. And in dominance hierarchies, certain members of the group control force or force threat. They can basically compel others through aggression to defer to them, to give them ground, to allow them to have mates and resources and things like that. But in humans, because we can learn from each other, other members of our social groups are also given status because they're sources of information. They might have valuable know-how. And so we have evolved to key in on those individuals most likely to possess this valuable information.
Lower status individuals preferentially attend to, watch and listen to, and imitate prestigious individuals, but not dominant ones.
Now, Lewis accuses Peterson of cherry-picking lobster behavior to make a point other animals would presumably invalidate. But Lewis is so ideologically possessed, so scientifically illiterate, so tribalistically blinded, that she can't even see the examples she presents don't invalidate Peterson's argument, they bolster it.
That's because in bonobo society, the mamas hold lots of power. This alpha female is one of the group's leaders. Watch how she snaps the sapling, then struts her stuff in a way that would make any dominant male chimpanzee proud.
You may have heard that killer whales are the apex predator of the ocean, but did you know the real master of the sea are the female killer whales? That's right, like a queen controls her kingdom, the matriarch controls her pod and all the decisions made within it, like migration routes, discipline, and pod hierarchy.
Once again, Peterson's argument is that hierarchies are a persistent environmental feature shaping our biology. Lewis's attempts to gender this argument do not disprove the point Peterson is making. Instead of providing insight into her own position or some thoughtful counterargument to Peterson's, Lewis's gender-laden, culture warrior worldview simply stands in the way. Instead of a lens rationally and empirically focused on achieving clarity, Lewis's gender ideology serves as blinders, blocking out any path to a fact-based political discourse grounded in mutual respect and common understanding.
There's this idea that hierarchical structures are a sociological construct of the Western patriarchy. And that is so untrue that it's almost unbelievable. And I use the lobster as an example because the lobster, we divulged from lobsters in evolutionary history about 350 million years ago, common ancestor. And lobsters exist in hierarchies, and they have a nervous system attuned to the hierarchy. And that nervous system runs on serotonin, just like our nervous systems do. And the nervous system of the lobster and of the human being is so similar that antidepressants work on lobsters. And it's part of my attempt to demonstrate that the idea of hierarchy has absolutely nothing to do with sociocultural construction, which it doesn't.
Let me just get this straight. You're saying that we should organize our societies along the lines of the lobsters?
I'm saying that it's inevitable that there will be continuity in the way that animals and human beings organize their structures. It's absolutely inevitable. And there is 1/3 of a billion years of evolutionary history behind that. Well, first of all, if you don't have a purpose, it isn't that your life becomes neutral in a meaningless sense. It's that your life becomes characterized by unbearable suffering. Because the baseline condition of life is something like unbearable suffering.